Okay, we are ready to go. Can like one person just type in to confirm that you can hear me? Just want to make sure you can still hear me. All right, cool, perfect. Okay, here we go. So welcome everyone to our monthly cost center manager briefing. So again, this is very similar to the ones we've had the last couple of months. This is one-way audio. Just as a reminder, if you do have questions, feel free as we go to go ahead and type them in the chat window. And we may not answer them immediately, but we'll try to take a break in between some slides here and make sure we get to whatever we can. If we can't answer them all, we will certainly follow back up. We did that before with some some answers to the questions later on. This session is being recorded and will be made available to participants that were unable to attend. Our intent is to talk about responsibilities that would the cost center manager security role in Workday would have. This is not meant to be formal training. And again, our audience for this is fairly broad. So I know all the colleges VP units are diligently working on all the security assignment work right now. So just because you're on this call doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have the cost center manager security role, but I do believe we have a great audience of a lot of fiscal employees across campus where this is going to be helpful no matter what to understand a little bit more about our processes and our process flows. So we're going to go ahead and go into the agenda. So I do have a couple of slides that I just wanted to talk about a few clarifications from some of what we've presented previously. And then we're going to go back to that picture that we showed before of the payment options, talk a little bit about terminology. We have Lisa Plaga joining us here today, our guest star, to talk about policy changes, since that's always a very relevant thing when it comes to travel. And then we're going to do a couple of demos. Our other guest star is Robin Gasson, so she is here and she's going to do a couple of demos for us. So we'll go ahead and move forward. So again, really want to try to start to prepare you for what these processes are going to look like in future state. Today we're focusing on expense management. We're really going to focus on travel expense management, so both the pre and post from a travel perspective. There is more to expense management besides just travel, but today that was going to be our focus. And then in each month, we'll continue to highlight some additional business processes. So for next month, I was thinking maybe about internal service delivery. But if you have other ideas or things that you think would be great that you have a lot of questions on, feel free to, you can send those to me or maybe Jimmy Dieter, and he can kind of record those and we can kind of take a look to see what you think would be a next great topic for March.
Or even put them in the chat window today.
Okay. So workflow clarification. So, as we're working on these, this is like everything else. It's we continue to refine a bit. And this drawing, we had put in another presentation that we had done, I think at the very first meeting for the cost center managers. And we realized that we should have probably clarified it a bit more because we didn't show on this original slide, and Jimmy has updated the deck from the original meeting too. So if you go out on our website, you'll see that updated. But we didn't have on this original slide the bottom row that talks about all spend authorizations. And it's a fact that in Workday, all spend authorizations will be required to be approved by the cost center manager, but then also by the department leader. So just want to make sure that's clear. We just accidentally omitted that in this more simplified picture in one of the previous presentations. Okay, and we'll talk a lot about that today. So more on that, but then we'll go to the next one. So the next slide is one we talked about last time in this meeting, and in this slide from the last time, and again, this has been updated on the website, in the marketplace lane, we didn't have the department leader showing up there as that gray chevron box, and that was misleading because both on marketplace and non-catalog request, if the purchase is over $2,500 or greater than 200 in high risk, it will go to department leader for an additional approval. In this case, that does not include if the purchase request is on OSP and OSP grant. So that is not necessary when it's on an OSP grant, or I know I've mentioned before on a FOD managed construction project. but wanted to make sure it was clear that the marketplace will also go to the department leader if it's not on an OSP grant, if it's over those thresholds. Right. Okay, so we will move into our topic of today, expense management. So if we go to the next slide, there we go. There we go. Okay. Last time we talked about the purple section here where we were paying suppliers. Today we're going to talk about the green section on expense management. That would be another topic, Jimmy, that we had talked about also maybe for March. I'm not sure if we'll be 100% ready for March for miscellaneous pays. That may be more of an April topic, but that was kind of the last one we want to touch on. That may be where we talk a little bit more about honorariums and those so those different types of payments that don't really fit into either suppliers or expense management. Okay, so we have a question. If it's an OSP grant, a spend off will not go to the department leader. No, for the spend off, all spend offs will go to the department leader. Because the department leader, and we'll talk about this on that flow, the department leader is approving for that employee to be basically to travel and to be off campus. So the department leader is not needed on the expense side or the purchase request side when it's on an OSP grant, but they are needed on the spend authorization. Hopefully that helps stores. Okay, so just a couple pieces of terminology, never hurts to revisit it again. So in current state, we might call it a travel request, a business leave. In future state, in Workday, it's called a spend authorization. In current state, we may call it an e-travel reimbursement request. In Workday equivalent, it's an expense report. And then again, chart field is now either work tags or in this case too, when we look at the expense side, we'll actually see something called expense items too, which then translate into spend categories. Okay, so we'll take a look at that too. Okay, so now I'm going to hand it over to Lisa to talk through a few slides on policy changes.
Sure, thanks, Holly. So I'll read through some of these policy changes. Where we are with policy is that all of the draft business and finance policies have been approved by President's Cabinet. So we're currently working on a spot to post them in their draft form so that you guys have ready access to them until they become official policies July 1. So the overview of policy changes associated with travel. The first one, we're reducing the time to submit travel expenses and receipts to 60 days from the date the expense was incurred. So this is very different than how it is today. Today it is 90 days post-trip, and it moved to 60 days from the date incurred. So that is a tremendous change for our university to make sure we're absorbing and comprehending. P-card purchases for travel are not permitted without an approved spend authorization. And then the next one is the cost comparisons of expenses with and without vacation days. Also, I'll add in there that the drive versus fly concept needs to be pulled on the same date that the travel expense purchase was made. So for example, if you're taking vacation in conjunction with your business travel, that price comparison of the cost associated with the business travel compared to that vacation needs to be pulled on the same day so we can ensure an apples to apples comparison. We are requiring travel arrangers or just anybody booking travel with group travel and through athletic travel to go through the university contracted supplier. So we have also updated the policy to reflect other travel rewards and incentives. So that's your hotel points, your credit card points, anything like that. The frequent flyer portion of policy is remaining the same. However, we've updated it to reflect other points, and the crux of that policy is that you cannot collect points to the detriment of the university. So for example, if you're a Marriott point person and the Hyatt's cheaper, you need to choose the Hyatt. We have updated the interim travel policy a little bit to require the use of the travel agency, except for international in-country travel. What we mean by there is, say you're trying to travel around China or India or that type of thing where you're essentially taking one of those small puddle jumper type taxi-X airplanes. Those you are not required to use the travel agency. And then the last one is requiring airfare purchases from the travel agency when using personal credit cards or personal travel in conjunction with business. So the preferred method, if you're booking your airfare and there's an additional incremental cost associated with a vacation trip, we're asking that you put that portion of the trip on your personal credit card, and then the rest of the trip, the business portion of the trip, can be charged to either the Ghost Card behind the scenes or another method of payment. Looks like we have some questions. So Maureen,
Sorry. Do you want to read it out loud too?
sure, yeah. Is this for staff, faculty travel only? Does this apply to those outside of the university but traveling to the university? No, the policy is required for staff, faculty travel. It is not, and it is only applicable to students when they're traveling in conjunction with their student employment. So Lisa, since we will be asking our employees to do travel arrangements early in advance of the workday cutover, is there some flexibility on the 60-day submittal right around go live? Not sure I understand that question, Lisa.
Because it's 60 days from when they return from the trip.
No, it's 60 days from the incurrence of the expense.
Incurrence of the expense.
So are you saying make the, Lisa, if you could add a little more context in the chat box, that would be great, or reach out to me later. I'm Plaga.5, that would be great, because I'm not totally grasping the question. Does the 60-day policy also apply to non-employees who may still be arranging their own airfare independent of CTP concur? We would recommend it. However, as you know, it's a little more difficult to control guests, etc. So it would not be considered an exception if they did not get their receipts in within 60 days. We did clarify permissible travel for spouses, partners, guests, really guests of the university traveling for a university business. We did update or refine the language associated with booking airfare outside of the travel agency. The general context is still the same. At the third time you book outside of the travel agency, it will not be reimbursed. And here's some more updates that I was hitting on in the earlier bullet, more detail around the update to personal travel, where essentially you're paying for it yourself in full with your own credit card or paying the vacation portion of that.
Okay, so P card?
Yeah.
P card.
P-card for Lisa, sorry.
You can talk about it.
No, oh wait, thanks Lisa for clarifying. I didn't understand the context for incurring when travel happens versus when it was booked. So if it is from the date of travel, I am good. Awesome, thank you, Lisa. So P-card policy changes. We are increasing the department cycle limits from 10,000 to 20. We are getting a lot of requests for those temporary increases on a regular basis. So we're gonna go ahead and bump those up. We are broadening the P-card eligibility. So right now there's a host of different requirements to just being approved by your senior fiscal officer within your college. We are requiring click-through agreements. So those are those agreements you have when you're buying things online. At the bottom, you see that little box that says, I accept the terms and conditions. Those should be reviewed by either the purchasing office or the Office of Legal Affairs, depending on the type of contract. We are requiring that any sales tax paid be marked as an exception, but we're increasing the requirement for attempting to recover those sales tax from $10 to $25, kind of reducing that administrative burden associated with that. So it is the unit's responsibility, if they identify fraud and it's not reported in the correct way, for the college to assume that those financial charges. We are requiring that as a P-card manager or a holder, you submit your expense reports weekly. And Robin will be demonstrating that. No, we're not doing P-cards today, I'm sorry.
Did this morning.
Yeah. Sorry, wrong meeting, guys. And last but not least, we're requiring that unit-related expenses are accounted for by the card managers and holders overarchingly by monthly close. Oh, thank you. For monthly mileage, does the 60-day policy begin on the first day of the month or the last? I would recommend you continuing to follow your,
Sorry. What happened here? There we go.
so for monthly mileage, for those users that have a lot of, I would say, frequent drivers, I would still focus on the monthly log process you submit currently. Because I'm assuming the majority of you have blanket travel requests out there, and you submit monthly mileage logs for those reimbursements. And I would encourage you to continue to follow that process.
See if I can do this without getting rid of the presentation.
Okay, so before we go on, if there's other questions on the policy items that you want to ask now, please do so, because Lisa is going to need to walk to another meeting. Okay, here we go.
Okay. Allowable for 1 to 2 finance or administrative types to do the P-card reallocation for all card managers in the departments. So I believe that role would be assigned to the expense data entry specialist. So it is permittable to do that. Lisa, can you talk a little bit more about the requirement to submit P-card expenses weekly? Yes, so P-card expenses futuristically, the reallocation concept that exists today in PeopleSoft will go away. So P-card receipts or P-card transactions will load automatically into your Workday expense report, and that'll load into the expense report of the individual cardholder or the P-card manager. And it's that person's responsibility to enter in the appropriate documentation, receipts, business purpose, that type of thing. And then that will workflow for approval through the cost center manager and such. So is tax between $0 and $25 required to be marked as exception? Yes. From Peggy, just to reiterate, sorry, for travel expenses, is the 60-day limit when they purchase or when they return from the trip? It is when they purchase. So when they purchase their conference registration in advance, they submit that expense at that point in time. So next question, is the expense report for Get Card required weekly too? Yes, I would expect so. What are the ramifications of not doing this? So my expectation is twofold. Number one, it'll be managed by the service centers to make sure things are being submitted on a timely basis. But from my perspective, this is a responsibility of being a P-card holder. And if you can't fulfill the requirements of being a P-card holder and that fiscal duty, we have to call into question whether you should be a P-card holder. Next, can you confirm my understanding is correct? OSP cards are eliminated future state, so SFOs will be approving all cards for their college in future state. Correct. The OSP Amex cards will be going away. We're currently working on the program to both notify those card holders and work through the transition with them. but they will be replaced with a P card. And yes, it'll go through the normal P card process where the SFO has to approve the distribution of those cards. Was there any more clarification on the reimbursement for Uber taxi trips to and from dinner for travel? As in, does that get taken out of the meal per diem, or is that another expense? That is a loaded question.
Mhm.
I would say we will take that one back and get more clarification as to your examples. If tax is recovered for the P card, is it still considered an exception? Yes. What about faculty research international travel that exceeds 90 days?
60 days.
Or 60 days, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I would say that depends on the situation. If you're internationally traveling somewhere like Paris or London, where Workday is easily accessible, that's a different facts and circumstances that somebody who's in the middle of a glacier that doesn't have any type of internet/phone access. So that's very dependent on that fact and circumstance. Oh, next topic might be P card. Sounds great.
Put it on the list.
I think I am still not understanding for travel expenses. These are usually purchased by the employees. P card purchases have 4-day receipt process. Allison, I'm not sure what you're meaning by 4-day receipt process. Maybe you want to reach out and give me a call separately. Anthony, if a traveler books a Marriott, which is more expensive than the Hyatt in that hypothetical, we would never know that. They had a choice for a cheaper hotel and that they would reap the rewards of Marriott. So it really just comes down to the honesty and integrity of the traveler. That is very true. I would presume, being the best university that we are hiring the best faculty and staff that we can. So I would assume they would be making the correct ethical choices for the university. Are you sure you can get reimbursed for pre-trip expenses prior to the date of the trip? Yes, you can. Now we cannot ask for any reimbursements until after the trip. That is very true. So the 60-day requirement is an IRS requirement. So we are definitely following the rules with the IRS. So yes, it is factually true. Yes, we will be reimbursing possibly prior to travel and after travel based on the 60-day criteria. Yes, we will.
So we may be about done. Maybe we can look at this very last one here because we got to move on. Click-through requirements.
I think the click-through requirements for the T's and C's for online purchases will be difficult to manage. Can you talk through the process as you anticipate it being handled? I can email separately with a few scenarios. Rick, it'd be great if you emailed me your scenarios and maybe we could address them through that point.
And actually, that's the last thing.
Grants will allow pre-trip reimbursement. Yes, this is an IRS requirement.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lisa. So again, if you have other very specific policy questions, feel free to email Lisa with those because she's going to have to. She answers them the best way, and I want to make sure we get the right answers for you because she's going to I think have to go to another meeting and just kind of listen in. So we're going to go ahead and move on to the process again. So I'm going to talk about each of the process flows from a high level, and then we're going to have Robin do a demo for each. So on the pre-travel side of the house, the spend authorization, the way it will work is the spend authorization will be submitted by either the actual end user who is going to be traveling, or the expense data entry specialist may also do that on behalf of that traveler. Okay. Then as soon as that spend authorization has been submitted, a notification will be sent from Workday that will go to both their OSU mailbox and also in their inbox in Workday. And no actions required, but it will be a notification to let that person's direct supervisor know that that travel has been submitted. So again, really trying to build awareness with the supervisor, and if the supervisor has any immediate concerns, that they could go back and talk with that employee right away. The next step in the actual approvals would be it would go to the cost center manager. The cost center manager, very similar to what we talked about in procurement last time, will be able to review the transaction and actually adjust where needed in terms of like FDM. So if there's some work tags that don't look right or something like that, they can add work tags, adjust those, confirm there's budget for the request. Look at the business purpose for reasonableness, and then also any sort of policy compliance they would perform at that point. So very similar again to what we talked about for the responsibilities that were on the purchase request. Then if there are the grant program project work tags used, and if the unit has chose to set up optional approvals, it would go to them. Then again, for all spend offs, it will go to the department leader. The department leader is approving for business purpose and also authorizing that traveler to leave campus. At that point, once the department leader has approved, the traveler is approved to go ahead and book their travel, do any prepaid arrangements, go out to the CPT site. At that point, there will be what's Workday calls a to-do step for the service center to then take a look at that travel authorization and review kind of ahead of time for any possible issues with it. So for example, if there was maybe something where there is vacation in conjunction with the official travel and they didn't see a comparison, this would be a great opportunity for the service center to reach out ahead and say, hey, we need you to do that today so we have that on record, not after this whole thing has been done and the travel's occurred. So they may also help facilitate any prepayments. Just in general, when I say service center, I think almost everyone on this call is from the campus side, but in general, when I say service center, that really only pertains to the campus side, not the health system. So I will go ahead and switch it over to Robin. She is going to pull this up in Workday and actually walk through the example.
Thank you, Holly. And I'm gonna have to close out of, get back into Workday.
I see your question, the other question we may need to get back to. We will document that one about the get card, and we can get back to you with an answer on that.
Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. I am going to do some fancy magic here and go into Workday as another user, and I'm going to be proxying in as Caitlin Evans. And Caitlin is going to be going on a trip, and she is doing this for professional development. And so she's going to start off by creating her spend authorization. And whenever we're talking about tasks that need to happen with expenses, we're always going to be talking about using the word create. That is synonymous with initiate the transaction. So we're going to create our spend authorization. And I hope this isn't the first time most of you are seeing Workday, so hopefully you understand the navigation of the system here. We are including a lot of help text and a lot of validation in the expenses module that will help guide the user on what needs to be put into the actual header information and line information. Whenever you see the red asterisks, of course, that's always something that's required by Workday. So to start with this spend authorization, we're going to go ahead and just enter our travel dates. And Caitlin's going to be traveling the 16th through the 20th of March. Just a brief description of why she is traveling. So just professional development. That's what she wants to indicate to her supervisor. And business purpose, this is definitely where we have some changes with how we think of business purpose today. For Workday, business purpose is going to be used more from a reporting standpoint. So you can see here you have a selection of different business purposes that you can select for the travel. Anytime in Workday where you see a circle before the item, that usually means it's a one-time select and you can't multiple select here. So we're going to say that she's going to a conference with that professional development. And justification is where we are encouraging or requiring users to put in more of that why the trip is occurring to help facilitate that approval process as it moves down the workflow. And she's not very verbose, so she's just going to put to gain skills. I'm just going to put in a few expense lines here, and this should be very similar to how we're doing travel today. You have to put in a line for airfare, a line for lodging, etc. So we're going to start off with airfare for Caitlin, and we're going to select our expense item. And so I'm going to put airfare in here. It's going to populate for us. And I'm going to estimate that my ticket's going to be about $500. And you certainly can put memo information in there if you would like to put more of an explanation. However, if you scroll down here, you'll see that we have additional information that is required for airfare. So we do need to repeat our departure and return dates. And hopefully everyone is choosing Coach Economy as their class of service. Origination, we can type in two different things here for our travel cities. I can put in my airport code, if I happen to know what that is, or I can put in the city. I'm going to pause there for just a really quick second so that everybody can see that. So I've completed all of my required fields. So that looks good. I'm going to go ahead and add another expense line here. And this is going to be for Uber or taxi rides. So I'm going to type in Uber. And you'll notice that it doesn't bring up Uber in the search after as the expense item. It actually brings in ground transportation. It would be the same if I typed in taxi. So I'm going to estimate about $100 for that ground transportation. And again, if I scroll down, I do need to provide a business purpose or a business reason for this expense. So I'm going to put local travel. And I'm going to put in one more expense item, so bear with me because I really want to show this functionality. And this is going to be where we're putting in our lodging. So again, I'm just going to type in hotel. And you can see here it's going to give me a couple of options. I'm going to select that lodging, daily room rate. And 4 days, I think, was on my trip, 4 nights in that lodging. And I am going to estimate $225 a night for that hotel room. And it's giving me an alert there. And don't fret, it's a yellow alert, it's not a red. So again, we want our users to scroll down. And it's asking me to put in my destination. And again, that was for San Francisco. And you'll notice that that alert went away. So that's going to be very critical. And the reason why we're asking for the destination again, what the system is doing behind the scenes, it is calculating that requirement we have, if I scroll back down here, for that 1.5 to 2 times the GSA rate, that our hotel and lodging should not go over that. If I should have typed in $500 a night for that room, I would have gotten that alert again, telling me that that's way too much money for a hotel room. So I have my 3 expense lines here. Everything else is going to be paid for. I'm not expecting any additional reimbursement at this point.
So we do have a couple questions real quick. Will we be creating a best practice one sheet with images for managers to pass out to the employees? Eileen, I'm gonna look to you here. We're definitely doing some training on this and
Yeah, there's a couple ways we're going to do this. One is sort of a snapshot of what does this look like to you? What kinds of things you will be doing in the system. Another is a really quick demonstration click through so that you can see the functionality. And the third piece will be, it's roughly 15 minutes to sit through how do I do this. So it's the true e-learning experience where you see all the different fields and have the opportunity to learn about how these different fields populate.
Okay, perfect. And then Robin, if we change the work tags on the first item, will it keep the updated work tags or always go back to the default?
That's a really good question. So now that I already have the expense items in, if I do change the work tags, I would have to change it on each expense line. However, if I had started off the transaction and changed my work tags at that first one, it would have followed through on all of them. That's a really good question.
Does class of service have to include all options? So right now we're showing like first class, I think is kind of the question. At this point it does.
I think it does, and we've discussed this quite a bit with process owners. I think the reasoning behind it is for some instances when you're traveling business class, there might be a leg that shows up as first class in there as well.
Okay. Does the per diem rate calculate like the hotel rates?
I'm hoping that we have this set up. I'm just going to change this. And it should have a warning in there. And there might, this is our development tenant, so it might not be fully updated with this expense rate, but yes, it does calculate just like our per diem rates do.
But I think the question was when you're doing the per diem, it's by like day, right? There's actually like a worksheet for per diem, isn't
Did
it?
you say it's
Yeah,
4
we can
days?
show
Yes,
that.
yes. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Can you split fund by percent or by amount?
You can split fund by amount, but not per, the system won't do it by percent. You can calculate it by percent and then split it that way.
Great. Okay. So do you want to go ahead and submit it?
Yeah.
Okay.
So this has been submitted, and it has also gone to the cost center manager is Carmela Spear. She's the next one up in the approval process. Did you want me to go ahead and go through all of the approvals?
No, but maybe you could just show the steps it's going to go through.
Sure. So if you scroll down to the details and process here and click over to process, that's going to show who is next up. It's not showing all of the one. This is the most immediate step that needs to happen next. But if you click on remaining process, it's going to show you all of the different required approvals that this will need to follow through.
Right. Okay. Oh, if your font enlarged for viewing purposes, our user is going to have to scroll down up and down that much. We can.
I think is your display setting zoomed in.
Oh,
He's asking.
I don't know if
Maybe
it
more of
may
a
be.
display setting.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that. That's a good thing to point out.
Okay, so let's maybe go on to the expense report.
Okay,
That sounds-
so we've got the spend authorization submitted.
Oh yeah, let's go back to the deck.
Okay.
Yes, good point. Okay. So we'll go to the flow for the expense report. Oh, okay. So sorry, my page looks a little different because it must change. So the first one is kind of the happy path. So okay, this we have adjusted the wording on this. So when we send this out, we adjusted in Jimmy's second, and we're using Robin's comment. So this is the happy path. This is the expense report comes back, the person comes back, the end user, the traveler, or the expense data entry specialist can enter that. and they would submit the expense report, and Robin will show you how you do that. You'll pull in the spend off to do that. And then the service center will always get that. Again, when we're talking anything on the campus side, they will receive that, and they'll be able to review for any policy exceptions or anything else that doesn't look, quite right on the expense report. There's actually 2 steps in that process. The service center rep will look at it first, and then the service center lead will approve and kind of double check everything. At this point, if the expense report is not greater than 20%, basically, sorry, this was what we were getting to earlier. If the expense report is not over by 20% or less of the spend off, so then, or there's no high risk. So again, the high risk stuff is business meals, entertainment. Then it is done. It goes to traveler to certify, and then it's done. The subject report goes out to get paid. The traveler does need to certify if they didn't submit the expense report for themselves. It's like very similar to today. Yeah. Okay, so high risk, and so high risk is by the spend categories. It's going to be driven by those expense items that Robin was showing. But when you're talking something here on the travel side, it would be business meals and entertainment are the big reasons, or alcohol, the big things that would be flagged. And the system automatically does that. It looks for those spend categories. Is there a location to upload quotes or attachments? Yes, there's definitely a place to upload attachments on your spend authorization. Yep. Okay, and then so that first one is the happy path. Either the expense report equaled what was on the spend off, or it wasn't over 20% from what was on the spend off. The second one is that there's maybe some exceptions here. So again, expense report is submitted by either the traveler or the expense data entry specialist. Same step here, service center reviews it. Again, the rep and the lead look at it. But in this case, it's above 20% of the original spend authorization, or there's a high risk item on there that's over $200. So in that case, the cost center manager will get involved. So the cost center manager will look at it again because there's concerns here about budget at that point if we've gone over 20% of what was originally on the spend authorization. And then if it includes something that's greater than 200 and high risk, it will go to that department leader to approve again. So in general, the cost center manager sees it if it goes over 20%, and then the department leader gets involved if it's high risk. So that's kind of and then same thing, the traveler would certify at the end if they weren't the ones that originally submitted. Okay. So we'll go ahead and go back. Okay, wait, hold on one second. No. High risk is estimating original spend off. Yeah, we have talked about this. Okay, so Rick's question. We are having trouble configuring the system. That's been a question that's come up. So say in the original spend off, they actually itemize that they're going to do a business meal, and it's going to be $300, and the department leader approves it. We're having trouble in the configuration, getting that workday, or getting the workflow basically to not hit the department leader on the expense side. So aware of that concern, Rick, and we can take that back again. But we're hitting an issue where a snag where we're maybe not able to be able to do that. I see your point. Will certification be required for non-employees? If so, is there perhaps some functionality like an auto-generated email alert built into Workday to send out those requests? So for like guest travelers, I think that's probably a good example there. We can check on that. I don't know if we know. So let me check on that about, like, for example, for guest travelers, if there's some sort of certification or not. Okay. Yeah, we can send out the high risk categories. We have those. Are you able to add trip maximums?
No, we're not.
They could make a comment, right? But there's nothing like that.
Correct.
Field.
Correct.
Okay. will the cost center approval be required on the payment processing? And can it be payment processing? It's only required if it goes over more than 20% of the original spend authorization. If airfare is greater than 20% above the airfare amount, but below, oh, okay, it's the total,
It's the total spend.
So it's overall, not necessarily one line item's over by 20%. Good question. Okay, good. Hopefully that helps.
Cool. So we're coming back into Workday, and the trip has taken place, and now we're doing our expense report where we're capturing all the true actual expenses that we incurred with our trip to San Francisco. I just want to point out a couple things on the expense report. We're not going to be covering all the topics or all the functionality of expense report today, but expense report is where an individual would be expensing department cards or be seeking a non-travel reimbursement. So it's a multifunctional page here in Workday. So that's why you see all the options at the very front of this header on what you can select. But since this is travel related, all travel is required to have a spend authorization. So we're going to be creating our expense report from the spend authorization. And you can see I have one here available for me to expense to. And once I select that spend authorization, it's going to populate a lot of that information I recorded on the front end. It's going to put in that brief description of professional development. It's going to say I went to a conference. It brings in the business purpose. And this does give you an opportunity to change work tags. Work tags are going to be defaulting based off of our personnel costing. So again, this is something that we're capturing in training and with some help aids, that if there is any change to the funding, that we're adjusting it at this point. Also too, Caitlin doesn't expect to have any additional expenses with this trip, so she's going to go ahead and mark that as this will be her final expense report for that spend authorization. And that's really going to be critical because in future state, travel will encumber at the time that that spend authorization is generated. So the way we're relieving that commitment or that encumbrance is by selecting that final expense report. Also too, Caitlin is a P-card manager. She's a P-card manager, and she also has some of her travel expenses that occurred that she put on her P-card. And so for P-card managers and for individuals who have P-cards, when they come in to do any type of expense report, it's going to show them everything that still has not yet been expensed for their credit card transactions. So as we covered with policy, that where our expectation is that people are maintaining these on a weekly basis, so they're not having to do a large amount at the back end. Just for time's sake, I'm going to go ahead and select this top one. She forgot she had to park at the airport. And here is her taxi that she had. And also, if I scroll down here, oh, this was her prepaid airfare that went through Concur. And so it came over onto my expense report to take care of as well.
So that's actually airfare. There was a question there. That's actually airfare that's coming through the Ghost card,
correct.
not on a department card.
Correct. So I'm going to click OK.
There is there's no warning in Workday if it looks like funds may not be available, but you certainly right within Workday can open a new window and go look at your department's budget versus actuals for a particular cost center or whatever work tags you're looking at, and you can see it real time right there.
Yep. Don't be alarmed by all the errors that are popping up here. It just means that it brought over those P-card expenses without some required information like expense item. So for this first one, this was my taxi. Remember, that was ground transportation. And it was $51.47. And it did bring in my merchant information from that credit card information. And this was local travel. And for each expense line, it's going to give me a space for selecting attachments or receipts. So I'm going to go ahead and select my receipt here. And I'm also going to click this little box that says receipt included. And that's going to help us too with some reporting to make sure that we have everything that we need.
So Robin, right, I don't know if this is where they would do it, but the question is, how would they do split funding?
So the way we have to do split funding in Workday is you have to create 2 expense lines
Okay.
for that item. So you would have an expense line that has taxi and then another expense line and split it in half. And we're still working out how this works for the credit card because you saw that the credit card is an automatic feed. So that poses a little bit of a challenge for split funding.
Okay.
Parking, again, I didn't plan on it, but it came about. So I'm going to click my parking. And again, it's requiring a memo line here to explain, what is needed. So I'm just going to put airport parking. And you guys are going to have to keep me on track with time. And again, it's not a personal expense. And I'm repeating this again, that it's airport parking. And we're actually working on removing that requirement at the memo line. And then I'm going to select my receipt.
So Robin, if the traveler forgets to check that as a final reimbursement, can the next person or next people that are approving it check that? The final payment checkbox that you had?
I believe so. So the next step after it's submitted is a review step. So that review step can change and edit the transaction.
Okay. Plus the service centers are
Correct.
step too.
Yeah.
So they should be able to do that. Yes, because that's a correct statement, Rick, until, or whoever says that, until it's marked as final. If there's anything left on the spend off, it will continue to encumber.
Correct. And then last but not least, my prepaid airfare. And you can see here, it brings in class of service. I didn't have to repeat that. It also brings in my destinations that I put in as well. And you'll also notice we do have some additional fields down here for service center use. So back to what we were talking about, if the service center notices something on the front end of the spend authorization and they've already worked through the channels to make sure that it's still appropriate to happen, they'll be entering probably some comments here as well.
So there's a question on if the spend authorization number will appear for prepay airfare and the expense reimbursement number for the reimbursement side.
So the spend authorization number populates as soon as you start submitting, as soon as you submit, it's there.
Okay.
Expense report, as you can see here, I haven't submitted it yet, but it's already populated with that expense report is.
And the spend authorization number is just going to replace like that quote,
T
T
number.
number.
Correct. Correct. And we have another alternative too for group travel.
Okay. So then this is ready to submit. Let's see.
Yep,
there's-
ready to submit.
okay.
And yay, no errors.
That's good. Okay.
No red flags. So yes, this is ready to submit.
Okay, so let's see, Robin, we have a couple more questions here. If travelers entering an expense report and is not a P card manager, but use the department card, how would that transaction be pulled into the expense report?
That is a really good question. So what Workday has just recently delivered, like in this last year, is the ability for people to reassign transactions. So we are enabling that for all department P card managers, not for the individual card managers, but for the department card managers. And we're asking that anytime somebody uses a department card that's travel related, that department card manager reassigns that to the employee so they can pull it into their expense report.
Okay, good question. If you've already reconciled your P card charges, would the item flow through the details, or do you have to detail the expense item? there really is no longer a reconcile your P card, right? I mean, this is
Right.
what it is pulling it into the expense
this is
report.
pulling it in.
For a P card holder, is there a role to delegate the expense report?
That, again, is a very good question. So I think this is going to be a little bit different than we talked about earlier. Like Holly was saying, we have this role called expense data entry specialist. And if the expense data entry specialist is doing the expense report on behalf of the P card manager, those transactions will be able to come in.
Yeah.
So does that answer the question? It's not really a delegate, it's just another person doing the
Doing it. Can a traveler enter a different work tag or additional work tags than what was approved on the spend off? And if they do change the work tag, will the expense report flow to a cost center manager for, Doris said Judy answered it, cost center manager for approval? So the question is, what if they change the work tags on the expense report and the spend off was approved on one cost center, but now they're moving it to a different one? It's a good question.
yeah, it's a really good question. I think we're going to have to take that one back. I think we're going to have to take that one back.
Investigate that.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, good questions. Okay, Lisa, can you request reimbursement for an item that was not originally on the set?
Yes, you can. One of the things I wasn't able to show in this tenant, but since I selected airfare on my spend authorization and I selected it on my expense report, in our most recent production tenant, it will show me that I've had a spend authorization line for that airfare for $500. So it should be able to help guide the user, but it does not stop it if there
Something else
came up, like we just saw with the parking.
Awesome. Okay, so I think we're about out of time. So we'll go ahead and wrap up here. And again, if you think of other questions afterwards, feel free to send those to us. So as always, if you have questions specific to this presentation, feel free to send those to myself or Jimmy Dieter. You can always contact us at the email address here, enterpriseproject@osu.edu. Please make sure you're visiting our website. We're posting a lot of more information out there as we're going, recording more sessions, so please make sure you're visiting that. Okay, so last question. Can you assign more than one person to a department expense data entry specialist role? And yes, you can. You could do that. Your college VP can have multiple people that can do that. Okay. Great. We have a couple of questions we're going to follow up on, so we will do that, and we'll get an email back out to everyone once we have those. Thanks, everyone.